The key wouldn't turn. Elena stood on her own porch at 2 a.m, jet lag pressing behind her eyes like thumbs, and her house key, the one she'd carried for 18 years, worn smooth at the edges, wouldn't turn in the lock. She tried again, wiggling it, checking the address plate beside the door as if she might have stumbled to the wrong house in the dark. Same brass numbers, same porch light with the crack in the glass she'd been meaning to replace. Movement inside caught her eye. Through the front window, past curtains she didn't recognize. Linen, expensive-looking, amber appeared. Elena's daughter-in-law wore pajamas, the silk kind, and her face arranged itself into something that might have been surprise or might have been satisfaction. Their eyes met through the glass. Amber lifted one hand to her mouth in exaggerated shock, then mouthed 2 words, "Go away." The curtain fell closed. Elena's suitcase, balanced against her hip, tipped over and clattered down the porch steps. She sat on the steps for 10 minutes, maybe 20, her violin case clutched across her lap like a child. Cars passed on the street. A dog barked somewhere. The neighborhood continued existing around her as if nothing had changed, as if the ground hadn't just opened up and rearranged itself into unfamiliar shapes. Finally, she dragged her suitcase back to the rental car, the one she'd picked up at the airport an hour ago, grateful she'd thought to rent instead of calling Derek for a ride, and drove. 3 weeks earlier, she'd been packing for Salzburg. The masterclass invitation had arrived in February, one of those opportunities you don't refuse even when the dates are inconvenient and the pay barely covers airfare. Derek had helped carry her violin case to the car, making jokes about how she was abandoning him for Austrian pastries. She'd laughed, distracted, running through her mental checklist. Passport, adapters, rosin, spare strings. Derek had mentioned something about tiles. "Amber's excited about the kitchen tile project while you're gone," he'd said, loading her suitcase into the trunk. "She's got samples all picked out." Elena had nodded, only half listening, already thinking about the flight. The diner, one of those 24-hour places that smelled like coffee and industrial cleaner, was nearly empty. Elena slid into a booth, ordered coffee she didn't want, and pulled out her phone. 17 texts from Derek spread across 3 weeks. She'd responded to most of them between rehearsals and coachings, quick replies that now seemed absurdly inadequate. "Mom, don't worry about the house. Amber's handling everything. Renovation going great. You won't recognize the place." That last one had made her smile in Vienna, exhausted after a 12-hour teaching day. Now it felt like a threat. She scrolled through photos from the tour, her students bright-eyed and terrified before their performances. The concert hall in Prague with its gold-leafed ceiling. Herself, reflected in a practice room mirror, looking more alive than she'd felt in years. She tried calling Derek, voicemail, tried again. The automated message told her the number was no longer in service, which was a lie. He'd just blocked her. Sure. What could go wrong? Dawn came slowly, gray light filling the diner windows. Elena stared at her reflection in the glass. 56 years old, hair pulled back in a travel-frayed bun, still wearing the scarf she'd bought in a Salzburg shop because the artist had reminded her of her mother. She looked like someone who'd been awake for 30 hours. She looked like someone whose son had just helped lock her out of her own house. Marcus answered his door in a bathrobe, glasses crooked on his face. He took one look at Elena standing on his doorstep with her suitcase and violin and said, "Come in." No questions. That was the thing about orchestra people. They understood that sometimes the music stopped and you needed somewhere to fall. He made tea, the fancy kind he ordered from some shop in Seattle, and sat across from her at his kitchen table while she explained. He listened with his cellist's patience, the kind that came from years of counting rests. When she finished, he said, "Stay here. We'll figure it out at rehearsal." The guest room smelled like dust and old sheet music. Elena showered, borrowed one of Marcus's spare towels. He kept extras, the kind of bachelor who'd learned to be prepared for unexpected guests, and stood under the water until it ran cold. She should have been crying, probably. That's what people did in situations like this. Instead, she felt hollow, scooped out. She dressed in yesterday's clothes, unpacked her violin, and started practicing scales. Muscle memory, the body's way of overriding panic. Her fingers found the positions automatically, and for 20 minutes she existed only in the space between bow and string. Morning light was filling Marcus's living room when she texted Jenna. Her former student, the one who'd gone to law school instead of pursuing performance, who'd sent a Christmas card last year with real estate paralegal printed under her name. Elena typed, "Hypothetical? Can someone lock you out of your own house? She stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. It didn't feel hypothetical. Jenna called within 30 seconds. "Where are you?" Her voice had that sharp professional edge Elena remembered from lessons, the way Jenna used to attack difficult passages like they'd personally offended her. Elena told her. Jenna said, "Don't move. I'm bringing paperwork. Rehearsal hall." Elena unpacked her violin with hands that wouldn't quite steady themselves, fingers fumbling the latches she could normally open in her sleep. The other musicians were filtering in, the usual pre-rehearsal chaos of tuning and gossip and complaints about parking. She rosined her bow, tightened the frog, checked the bridge alignment. Normal. Things. The orchestra director, Thomas, appeared at her shoulder, frowning. "You look wrecked," he said, which was the kind of blunt observation he specialized in. Elena set down her bow. "Can we talk after?" He nodded, still frowning, and squeezed her shoulder before walking away. They made it through the Brahms, barely. Elena's intonation was off in the third movement, and she could feel Thomas watching her from the podium. Afterward, he pulled her into his office, cramped, overflowing with scores and coffee cups, and shut the door. She told him, all of it. The changed locks, Amber's face in the window, Derek's block number. Thomas listened with his conductor's focus, the kind that missed nothing. When she finished, his jaw was tight enough that she could see the muscle working under his skin. "What do you need?" he asked. She didn't have an answer yet. Jenna met her in the parking lot, messenger bag bulging with manila folders. She'd printed everything, property records showing Elena's name as sole owner, mortgage documents, even the original deed from when Elena had bought the house 23 years ago. "This isn't legal," Jenna said, spreading papers across the hood of Elena's car. "But eviction law protects occupants, even illegal ones. Could take months to get them out through the courts." She looked up, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Unless you want to get creative." Elena drove past her house on the way back to Marcus's place. She told herself she was taking the scenic route, that it was coincidence. It wasn't. Amber's car sat in the driveway, the silver SUV that Derek had co-signed for last year. New doormat on the porch, one of those expensive ones with a geometric pattern. Potted plants flanking the door, herbs maybe, the kind of detail that screamed lifestyle blog. She was slowing down, staring, when Margaret appeared on the sidewalk. The neighbor, the one who'd lived 3 houses down for a decade, waving like they were old friends. Elena pulled over. Margaret bustled up to the window, smiling that smile people wore when they had news to share. "The renovations look beautiful," she said, leaning down to peer through the passenger window. "Amber showed me the before pictures. Such a transformation. And so thoughtful of her to handle everything while you transition." The word landed like a slap. "Transition?" Elena kept her voice level. Margaret nodded, enthusiastic. "To the assisted living facility. She showed me the brochures. That lovely place on Riverside. Very nice. Must be such a relief to downsize." Elena's stomach dropped through the car floor and kept going. She forced her face into something resembling a smile, mumbled something non-committal, and drove away before Margaret could say anything else. In the rearview mirror, she saw the neighbor still standing there, looking pleased with herself for having delivered such nice news. Coffee shop, laptop open, hands still shaking slightly. Elena created a new document and started typing. Not a legal strategy. Jenna had that covered. Something else. A list. Names, connections, the social architecture she'd built over 23 years in the regional orchestra, teaching positions at 3 different music schools, guest conducting gigs, master classes, every student she'd mentored, every colleague she'd collaborated with, every arts administrator she'd smiled at during fundraising galas. She'd spent 2 decades thinking of it as her career. Now it looked like something else entirely. A network, a web, a weapon if she wanted it to be. She called the Arts Council coordinator, Sarah, whose daughter she'd taught for 6 years. Casual conversation, catching up after the European tour, asking about upcoming events. "I'm temporarily displaced," Elena mentioned, keeping her voice light. "Family situation. But Amber's been so helpful spreading the word about my transition." She let the words hang there, planted like seeds. Sarah made a sympathetic noise, promised to keep her updated about performance opportunities, and Elena could hear the unasked questions hovering in the pause before they said goodbye. That night, Marcus's guest room felt smaller. Elena lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Sleep felt impossible, a country she'd been exiled from. She got up, grabbed her violin, and played Bach in the dark, the D minor partita, the chaconne movement that felt like grief structured into something bearable. Marcus appeared in the doorway after the first variation, hair standing up, squinting without his glasses. He didn't say anything, just leaned against the doorframe and listened. When she finally lowered the bow, he asked, "What are you planning?" Elena looked at him, this colleague who'd given her shelter without hesitation, who understood that sometimes you needed to play through the pain before you could speak it. "Something Amber won't see coming," she said. Morning came with the kind of clarity that felt almost violent. Elena showed up at her house at 9, locksmith van behind her, police cruiser behind that. She'd called ahead, explained the situation to a dispatcher who'd sounded bored until Elena mentioned she had the deed. Officer Ramirez looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but he followed her up the porch steps and knocked. Amber opened the door wearing yoga pants and a concerned expression that had been carefully arranged, probably in the mirror. "Elena?" Her voice pitched high, surprised. "We've been so worried. Derek's been trying to reach you." Officer Ramirez asked Elena to prove ownership. She handed over her driver's license, the deed Jenna had printed, her mortgage statement with the address printed in block letters. Amber watched, still holding the door like she might close it at any moment. "Of course it's her house," she said, and Elena heard the trap being set. "But she gave us permission, didn't you, Elena?" Her eyes pleaded, "A performance for the officer. For the renovation. You said we could stay during the project, remember?" Elena stepped past her into the foyer. The walls were a different color, pale gray instead of the cream she'd chosen. Her furniture had been rearranged, pushed into configurations that made the rooms look staged, impersonal. Amber followed, still talking, her voice taking on that reasonable tone people used when they were lying and needed witnesses. "You were gone so long, we thought you'd decided to stay in Europe. That teaching position you mentioned, we assumed you'd taken it." Elena kept walking down the hall toward what used to be her music room. The door was open. Inside, her music stands had been removed, her filing cabinet pushed into the closet. Yoga mats covered the floor, arranged on top of a rug Elena had never seen. Crystals lined the windowsill, amethyst, rose quartz, things that caught the light prettily. A diffuser released lavender-scented steam into the air. "My wellness space," Amber said from behind her, and Elena heard pride in her voice. Actual pride. "I knew you wouldn't mind. You were never home anyway." Derek's car pulled into the driveway. Elena heard the engine cut, the door slam, footsteps hurrying up the walk. He appeared in the doorway of the wellness space, circles under his eyes like bruises, and couldn't look at her. Amber moved to his side immediately, gripped his hand. Officer Ramirez shifted his weight, impatient. "This is a civil matter," he said. "Sort it out yourselves or get lawyers involved." He handed Elena his card, nodded to the locksmith, and left. His cruiser pulled away while they all stood there in the lavender-scented room that used to hold Elena's life's work. Elena turned to Derek, her son, 29 years old, who'd learned to walk holding onto her violin case for balance. "I want my house back," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Derek mumbled something about misunderstanding, about Amber wanting to help, about how complicated it all was. Amber cut in, her reasonable voice cracking slightly. "After all we've done, the contractors we hired, the money we spent fixing this place up?" She gestured around like the room was evidence of benevolence. Elena's eyes found the corner where Amber had stacked boxes. Cardboard moving boxes, the flaps folded over but not taped. She walked over, knelt, opened the top one. Her certificates from the conservatory, her performance awards, the framed photo of her with Perlman from that masterclass in Aspen 12 years ago, all of it packed away like garage sale inventory. Something inside her went very cold and very clear. She stood, picked up the box, and walked toward the front door. Amber called after her, voice rising. "You can't just abandon your responsibilities. We have a lease agreement." Elena stopped. "No," she said, not turning around. "You don't." She carried the box to her car, set it carefully in the trunk next to her. Suitcase. The locksmith was leaning against his van, scrolling through his phone. "You still need me?" he asked. Elena looked back at the house, at Amber standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, at Derek behind her looking like he might be sick. "Not yet," she said. The locksmith shrugged, got in his van, and drove away. Elena sat in her car and opened the box in her lap. The letter was tucked between two certificate frames. Cream-colored paper, her own handwriting from 5 years ago when Derek had asked about her will. This house is yours someday, but not yet. Let me live first. She remembered writing it, trying to be clear about her intentions without being morbid about mortality. Amber had saved it, had probably found it in Elena's desk during one of her renovation searches, had seen the words and built a story around them. Proof, maybe. Or ammunition. Elena folded the letter and put it in her pocket. Jenna was already at the wine bar when Elena arrived, sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and a glass of red half finished. She looked up when Elena sat down, closed the laptop, and pushed the wine list across the table. "You look like you need something stronger than what I'm having," she said. Elena ordered a Malbec, expensive, and waited until it arrived before speaking. Jenna outlined the legal options while Elena sipped. Eviction proceedings, trespassing charges, civil suits for damages. All of it slow, expensive, uncertain. 12 months minimum, Jenna said. Maybe 18 if they fight it, and they'll fight it. She paused, watching Elena's face. "What are you thinking?" Elena thought about last year's dinner party, the one where Derek had brought Amber for the first time as his fiancée. Amber had talked about her Instagram strategy, her lifestyle brand, how she was building an audience for her authentic home journey. Derek had looked uncomfortable even then, kept trying to change the subject. Elena had thought it was wedding nerves. Now she wondered what else she'd missed while being polite. She pulled out her phone and searched for Amber's Instagram. 14,000 followers. The recent posts made her hand tighten around her wine glass. Photos of her living room, her kitchen, her backyard garden, all captioned with Amber's breathless prose about my beautiful home renovation journey. She'd tagged local designers, paint companies, furniture stores. The comments were full of heart emojis and requests for product links. "Did you know this homeowner locked out the actual owner?" Elena said, showing Jenna the screen. Jenna's eyebrows rose. That's not in any of her captions. Elena took screenshots, methodically saving each post. Then she opened a new email, blank, anonymous, the kind of account you could set up in 30 seconds, and attached the property records Jenna had given her. She added the screenshots and typed a single sentence to each designer Amber had tagged. "Did you know this homeowner doesn't own this home?" She hovered over the send button, her finger trembling slightly. Jenna watched without commenting. Elena pressed send, closed her laptop, and finished her wine. The Arts Council event that evening was the kind of thing Elena normally enjoyed. Chamber music in a gallery space, wine and cheese, conversation with people who understood that art was work and work was art. She almost didn't go, then decided that hiding was exactly what Amber would expect. She wore the dress she'd bought in Vienna, the dark blue one that made her feel like herself, and arrived fashionably late. Sarah, the coordinator, spotted her immediately and crossed the room with her arms already extended for a hug. "You're back." Sarah's smile was genuine, the kind that crinkled her eyes. "How was Salzburg? Tell me everything." They talked about the masterclass, about Sarah's daughter who was studying engineering now instead of violin, about the gallery's acoustics. Then Sarah's expression shifted, became careful. "I saw Amber's posts," she said quietly. "The renovation looks extensive." Elena sipped her wine, let the pause stretch. "Yes," she finally said. She made it sound like her renovation. Nothing more, no explanation, no accusation. Just the facts, delivered flatly. Sarah's face changed, not dramatically, but Elena saw the moment understanding arrived, saw the questions reforming themselves behind her eyes. "Oh," Sarah said. Just that single syllable weighted with implication. She touched Elena's arm, squeezed gently. "If you need anything," she said, and Elena nodded, grateful for what wasn't being said. They moved on to other topics, but Elena felt the shift, the way Sarah's warmth had acquired an edge of protective anger. Walking to her car later, Elena's phone buzzed. Derek. "Mom, please. Amber's upset. Can we talk?" She stared at the message, at the way he'd put Amber's emotions before any acknowledgement of what had happened. The text sat there, waiting for a response, the 3 dots appearing and disappearing as Derek typed and deleted, typed and deleted. Elena put her phone in her purse and didn't answer. She was done talking. Talking required the assumption that both parties were operating in good faith, and that assumption had died somewhere between Salzburg and her front porch at 2 a.m. She drove to her street, parked 3 houses down where the streetlight created a pool of shadow, and looked at her house. Lights on in the living room, in the bedroom that used to be hers. Amber moved past the window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. Elena imagined Derek on the other end, caught between the woman he'd married and the mother he'd helped betray. She didn't feel sorry for him yet. Maybe eventually, but not yet. Her phone buzzed again. Not Derek this time. Anna, the violinist from the orchestra, sending a photo. Elena opened it and laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in days. Anna had screenshot one of Amber's Instagram posts and drawn devil horns on her head in red digital ink. The caption, "Saw the property records? Want to help with anything?" Elena typed back, "Tomorrow, early." Anna sent a thumbs up and a coffee emoji. Elena started the car, drove back to Marcus's house, and slept through the night for the first time since returning home. The U-Haul smelled like cardboard and other people's moves. Elena signed the rental agreement at 7 in the morning, her signature surprisingly steady, and drove the truck to Marcus's house, where 3 of her orchestra friends waited with coffee and questions they were polite enough not to ask. Marcus handed her a thermos without comment. Anna arrived in leggings and an old sweatshirt, hair piled on top of her head, looking ready for physical labor. James, the principal violist, brought work gloves. They all climbed into their separate cars and followed Elena through the quiet morning streets to her house. Amber's car was already gone. Elena had watched the driveway from down the street until the silver SUV pulled out at 6:30, Amber's morning yoga class schedule as predictable as a metronome. Derek had left earlier, his truck disappearing into pre-dawn darkness, heading to the construction site where he worked. Elena had timed this carefully. She pulled the U-Haul into the driveway, and her friends parked along the curb. The locksmith arrived 5 minutes later, the same one from yesterday. Officer Ramirez pulled up behind him, looking even less enthusiastic than before. "You again," he said to Elena, but he checked her deed and ID and nodded to the locksmith. The door opened. Elena stepped inside and the lavender smell hit her first, that diffuser still running in what used to be her music room. She turned to her friends, their faces expectant in the morning light streaming through windows. "Not my things," she said. "Hers." Anna's eyebrows shot up. Marcus smiled, slow and understanding. James cracked his knuckles. "Where do we start?" They started in the bedroom. Amber's clothes filled the closet that used to hold Elena's performance dresses and winter coats. Designer labels, tags still attached to some pieces, the kind of aspirational wardrobe that spoke of Instagram aesthetics and credit card debt. Anna pulled armfuls of hangers down while Elena folded items into neat stacks. Marcus appeared with garbage bags, the heavy-duty kind, then paused. "Actually, no. She deserves better than garbage bags." He disappeared and returned with the moving boxes that Amber had used to pack away Elena's certificates. Poetic justice in cardboard form. The bathroom yielded an astonishing array of products. Serums and toners and masks, crystals arranged on the counter like a mystical pharmacy, a jade roller that probably cost more than Elena's monthly water bill. Anna packed them carefully, wrapping the crystals in towels. "If we're doing this, we're not being petty," she said, and Elena felt grateful for friends who understood the difference between reclaiming space and cruelty. The living room contained Amber's yoga equipment, mats, blocks, a meditation cushion embroidered with Sanskrit that Amber probably couldn't read. Resistance bands in every color, weights arranged by size, a singing bowl that James picked up and rang experimentally. The sound echoed through the house, clear and sustained. "That's actually kind of nice," he said, wrapping it carefully. In the kitchen, Amber's appliances crowded the counters. A juicer, a spiralizer, an air fryer, a collection of Le Creuset that had replaced Elena's practical cookware. Marcus photographed the arrangement before they started packing. "Evidence," he said. "Just in case." The wellness room took longest, every crystal, every yoga prop, every vision board covered in magazine cutouts of perfect homes and perfect lives. Elena stood in the doorway while the others worked, watching her music room emerge from underneath Amber's manufactured serenity. Her filing cabinet came out of the closet. Her music stands unfolded. The diffuser went into a box, unplugged, its lavender fog finally dissipating. 2 hours. They carried everything to the sidewalk in a steady stream, building neat stacks along the curb. Marcus arranged items almost artistically, clothes folded and contained in boxes, larger items grouped by category, everything covered with the tarps they'd brought in case of rain. If we're doing this, let's do it with style, he said, stepping back to survey their work. The sidewalk looked like an upscale yard sale, orderly and deliberate. Elena stood on her porch and stared at the display, feeling something shift in her chest. Not quite triumph, more like the sensation of a dislocated joint clicking back into place. Anna pulled out her phone and photographed the sidewalk setup from several angles. Elena looked at her sharply. "Don't post it," she said. Anna shook her head. "I'm not, just documenting." She showed Elena the photos, time-stamped clear, showing everything neatly arranged and protected, in case she claims you damaged anything. Elena nodded, understanding. They were being careful, methodical, unassailable. Inside, they moved Elena's furniture back to its original positions. The couch returned to the wall, where afternoon light hit it perfectly for reading. The armchair that had belonged to her mother went back by the window. Her bookshelf, which Amber had relocated to the garage, came inside with its cargo of scores and music theory texts and the novels Elena read between rehearsals. The house began to remember itself, room by room, like a body recovering from anesthesia. The music room took longest to restore. Elena's hands shook slightly as she hung her certificates back on the walls, the frames fitting perfectly over the nail holes that had never been filled. Her sheet music came out of boxes and returned to the filing cabinet, organized by composer and era the way she'd always kept it. Marcus helped her set up the music stands, adjusting heights without being asked. James found her recording equipment in the garage, wiped dust from the cables, reconnected everything. Anna positioned the chair where Elena always sat to practice, the one with the cushion molded to her shape from years of morning scales. When they finished, Elena stood in the doorway of her music room and couldn't speak. The others gathered behind her, quiet, letting her have the moment. Finally, she turned. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt impossibly inadequate. Marcus pulled her into a hug, brief and tight, and the others followed. They didn't need speeches. Orchestra's people understood about restoration, about bringing something back from silence. She sat in her chair and touched her violin case, resting where it belonged on the small table by the window. The leather was worn smooth at the handle, familiar as her own hand. She didn't open it, not yet. Just sat there, breathing in the absence of lavender, the presence of space that was hers again. Derek called at noon. Elena answered on the third ring. "Mom, what the hell?" His voice was tight, panicked. She could hear car sounds in the background. He was driving, probably breaking traffic laws to get here. "I'm home," Elena said, her voice calm in a way that surprised her. "Amber's things are outside. She has until 5 to collect them." Derek made a sound like he'd been punched. "You can't," Elena cut him off. "I already did." She hung up before he could respond, and the click of disconnection felt like punctuation. Her friends left around 1, refusing offers of lunch or payment, insisting they'd done exactly what they wanted to do. Elena stood on her porch and waved as they drove away. Marcus last, his cello visible in his back seat through the window. The sidewalk display remained orderly and damning. Neighbors had started to emerge, curiosity drawing them out. Margaret appeared on her lawn, staring. Elena waved. Margaret didn't wave back. Amber arrived at 3, an hour before Elena's deadline. Derek's truck pulled up behind her SUV, and they both got out slowly, like people approaching an accident scene. Amber saw the sidewalk and screamed, an actual scream that brought more neighbors to their windows and porches. She rounded on Elena, who stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "You're insane." Amber's face was red, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. "Completely insane." Elena didn't raise her voice. Volume wasn't necessary. "You locked me out. I let you back out. We're even." Her tone was conversational, almost pleasant. Amber sputtered, searching for words, for leverage, for the reasonable voice that had worked so well with the police officer yesterday. "I'll call the police," she finally managed. Elena nodded toward Officer Ramirez's card, which she taped to the front door. "Go ahead. They were here this morning. House is mine. They confirmed it." Derek finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Mom, this is too far." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, at the son she'd raised alone after his father left, the boy she'd brought to rehearsals when she couldn't afford childcare, who'd done homework in the back of concert halls and learned to sleep through Mahler. "Is it?" she asked. "Where were you when she changed my locks? When she told the neighbors I was moving to assisted living?" Derek's face did something complicated. shame and confusion, and the dawning realization that he'd chosen wrong and couldn't unchose it. Amber grabbed his arm, nails digging into his jacket. Derek didn't move, didn't look at her. Elena continued, her voice still quiet, still steady. You can visit any time, alone, but she's not welcome here until she apologizes, to me. Genuinely. She let that word hang between them. Genuinely. As if they all knew Amber's apologies came pre-packaged, designed for Instagram captions and conflict resolution, without actual resolution. Amber pivoted, tears appearing on cue like she'd blinked them into existence. I was helping. The house was outdated. You were never here. Her voice climbed higher, performing for the neighbors who were definitely watching now. Elena felt something like pity, brief and unexpected. This woman, so desperate to curate a life that she'd stolen someone else's. Because I was working, Elena said. Because I have a life. That doesn't make my house yours. Amber loaded her car in furious silence, throwing boxes into the back seat with none of the care that Elena's friends had used when packing them. Derek helped, mechanical, not speaking. The neighbors whispered on their lawns. Margaret stood on her porch looking horrified, finally understanding what Elena had tried to tell her. The yoga mats went in, the crystals, the Le Creuset in its rainbow of expensive enamel. It took 4 trips to fit everything. The SUV sat low on its suspension, overfilled. Amber peeled out without looking back, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. Derek remained, standing by his truck with his hands in his pockets. He looked younger suddenly, like the boy he'd been before life, and Amber had complicated him. He walked slowly to the porch where Elena stood. She said you wanted this. The renovation, that you told her to take over. His voice was small, asking for something Elena wasn't sure she could give yet. And you believed her without asking me? Elena kept her voice level, not angry, just genuinely curious about how her son had arrived at this particular moment of failure. Derek couldn't answer. His mouth opened and closed and nothing came out that meant anything. Finally, he just shook his head and walked to his truck. He sat there for a minute before starting the engine, and Elena watched him through the windshield, seeing him see her. Then he drove away, and she was alone on her porch with her house behind her and the neighborhood slowly returning to its business around. Her week later, Elena hosted a gathering. Not a party. Parties felt performative, celebratory in a way that didn't match the quiet reclamation she'd achieved. Just an evening with people she trusted, witnesses to the fact that she existed here, that she belonged in these rooms. She made coffee and bought cookies from the bakery on 5th Street, the good ones with real butter that cost too much. Marcus arrived first, bringing wine he'd been saving for an occasion he couldn't quite name. Anna came with her girlfriend, a pianist Elena had met at a few concerts. James brought his partner and their teenage daughter, who looked around with wide eyes at the musical instruments and framed certificates. Jenna arrived last, still in work clothes, apologizing for being late. Margaret from down the street knocked tentatively at the door around 7, holding a casserole dish like a peace offering. The house felt full in a way it hadn't in years. Not crowded. Elena had always been careful about guest lists, about the energy different people brought into a space, but occupied with intention. They sat in the living room, where Amber had tried to stage an Instagram-perfect existence, and the conversation moved easily from music to work to the small frustrations of daily life. No one mentioned Amber directly, but the absence hummed like a note just below hearing range. Margaret sat on the couch, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, and finally spoke into a lull in conversation. I should have asked you directly, she said, looking at Elena, about the assisted living, about all of it. I'm sorry. Elena set down her own mug, considered her response. Margaret looked genuinely distressed, her face creased with the kind of regret that came from realizing you'd been complicit in something without meaning to be. You trusted someone who seemed trustworthy, Elena said. That's not your fault. She meant it. Amber had been convincing, that was the point, that was the skill she had cultivated. The ability to seem helpful while helping herself. Margaret's shoulders relaxed slightly, gratitude visible in the way she exhaled. They moved on to other topics, and Elena noticed how the room's energy had shifted, how Margaret's presence changed from uncomfortable obligation to genuine participation. Anna mentioned, casually over her second glass of wine, that Amber's Instagram had gone private. Noticed it yesterday, she said, scrolling through her phone, and her follower count dropped, down to like 11,000. She showed Elena the screen, Amber's profile picture still visible, but the grid locked behind a privacy wall. Elena took the phone, zoomed in on the profile. The bio had changed too. No longer home renovation enthusiast and lifestyle curator. Now just private account. Anna continued, word got around in the local design community. No one wants to be associated with, quote, that woman who locked out the homeowner. She said it matter-of-factly, no triumph in her voice, just reporting information. Elena handed back the phone. She hadn't posted anything herself, hadn't needed to. The truth had done its work quietly, spreading through the network she'd built over 2 decades of teaching and performing and showing up. The designers Amber had tagged had quietly untagged themselves. The furniture stores had stopped engaging with her posts. The whole careful construction of Amber's online presence had collapsed not with drama, but with silence, with people stepping away without comment. It felt appropriate somehow. Elena hadn't needed to destroy Amber's reputation. Amber had done that herself. Elena had just provided the information for people to make their own decisions. Derek texted around 8:30. Can I come by? 3 words, a question instead of a demand. Elena looked at the message for a long moment, aware that her friends had noticed her attention shift. She typed back, yes. Nothing more. He replied immediately. 20 minutes. Elena told her guests, kept her voice neutral. They understood, started gathering their things without being asked to leave. Marcus squeezed her shoulder on his way out. Call if you need anything, he said, and she nodded, grateful for friends who knew when to stay and when to go. She cleaned up the coffee cups and wine glasses, wiped down the kitchen counter, and straightened the cushions on the couch. Nervous energy, the need to keep her hands busy while she waited. Derek arrived exactly 20 minutes later, punctual in the way he'd always been, a trait he'd inherited from her. She opened the door before he could knock. He stood on the porch looking exhausted, his work jacket wrinkled, dirt under his fingernails from whatever job site he'd been on. Hi, he said, and the single syllable contained a world of uncertainty. Elena stepped back, let him in. He moved through the entryway slowly, looking around like he was cataloging changes. The house was hers again. That was obvious in every detail, from the music on the stands to the books on the shelves, to the way the furniture sat in configurations that made sense for living rather than photographing. They went to the living room and sat, Elena in her chair by the window, Derek on the couch with a full cushion of space between where he sat and where she was. The silence stretched. Outside, a car passed. Someone's dog barked. Derek opened his mouth twice before words came out. I was afraid to choose sides. Elena didn't respond immediately. She let the statement sit between them, examined it from different angles. Finally, there weren't sides, there was right and wrong. Her voice was gentle but firm, the same tone she'd used when he was young and had done something he knew was wrong but didn't want to admit. Derek nodded and she saw tears forming, his face crumpling in a way that made him look 12 again. I didn't want to see it, he said, and the tears spilled over, tracking down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away, just let them fall while he stared at his hands. Elena's instinct was to comfort him, to cross the space between them and pull him into a hug, the way she had through every childhood hurt and disappointment. She didn't move. He needed to sit with this, to feel the weight of what he'd allowed to happen. They stayed like that for what felt like a long time, Derek crying quietly, Elena watching him, with something that wasn't quite forgiveness yet but wasn't rejection either. Eventually his breathing steadied. He looked up, eyes red. Amber said you didn't appreciate her efforts, that you were difficult, cold, that the house was wasted on someone who was never there. Elena absorbed this, the portrait Amber had painted of her. Difficult, cold, wasted potential. She thought about the years she'd spent building a career as a performing musician, the travel and rehearsals and teaching that had given her life shape and meaning. How Amber had reframed that dedication as absence, as failure. And you believed I'd give away my house without telling you? She asked. Derek shook his head miserably. I don't know what I believed. She was so sure, so confident. And you were in Europe and your texts were short, and I wanted to believe her version was true because it was easier. Elena stood, went to the kitchen, gave them both space to breathe. She filled the kettle, set it on the stove, found the good tea, the kind Marcus had given her last Christmas, loose leaf that required steeping. The ritual of tea-making gave her hands something to do while her mind worked. Derek had chosen ease over truth, comfort over confrontation. She understood that impulse even as it had nearly cost her everything. The kettle whistled. She poured water over tea leaves, watched them unfurl in the heat, carried 2 cups back to the living room. She handed Derek a cup and sat back down. They sipped in silence. The tea was too hot, scalding her tongue slightly, and she welcomed the small, sharp sensation. Derek held his cup in both hands like a child. "What happens now?" he asked. Elena considered the question, its implications. He was asking for a roadmap, for her to tell him how to fix what he'd broken. She couldn't do that for him. "You decide who you want to be," she said. "I already know who I am." Derek absorbed this, nodding slowly. They finished their tea. He asked if he could see the music room, and she led him down the hall. He stood in the doorway the way she had after her friends had helped restore it, taking in the familiar arrangement, the certificates back on the walls, the violin case by the window. "I remember doing homework in here," he said. "You'd be practicing, and I'd be at that desk in the corner, trying to concentrate through the Brahms." Elena smiled. "You complained constantly." Derek smiled too, brief and sad. "I loved it, though. The sound. Knowing you were close." He left around 10, hugging her at the door, brief and tight and wordless. Elena watched him walk to his truck, watched him sit there for a moment before starting the engine. The taillights disappeared around the corner and she closed the door, locked it with the new lock the locksmith had installed, and stood in her entryway feeling the quiet of her house settle around her. She was tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from emotional exertion rather than physical labor. She made more tea, carried it to the music room, and sat in her chair without turning on the lights. The days developed a rhythm. Elena returned to full rehearsal schedule, threw herself into the new concert season with something her colleagues noticed and commented on. "You're playing angry," Anna said after a particularly fierce run-through of the Shostakovich. Elena lowered her bow, considered the observation. "Not angry," she said. "Present." Anna nodded like this made perfect sense. Thomas, the conductor, pulled her aside after rehearsal a week later. "Whatever happened to you in Europe," he said, "or after you got back, keep it. This is the best I've heard you play in years." She took on additional students, 2 high schoolers and a college sophomore who commuted from the next town over. Teaching filled her afternoons with scales and etudes and the particular satisfaction of watching someone else's fingers find the right positions. Her former student who'd just graduated showed up asking for career advice. Should she pursue performance or take the orchestra position in Minneapolis? Elena made coffee, and they talked for 2 hours about ambition and practicality and the different ways a life in music could unfold. This was the thing Amber had called absence, this fullness. Elena felt anger about that sometimes, in small flashes, the audacity of being judged by someone who'd never built anything that couldn't be photographed. Derek visited weekly. Alone, always alone. They didn't talk about Amber much. Her name came up occasionally in passing, the way you'd mention weather or traffic. He helped fix the fence where 2 boards had rotted through, bringing his tools and working quietly in the backyard while Elena practiced inside. They repainted the guest room together, covering the gray Amber had chosen with a warm cream that Elena picked out. The work was meditative, repetitive, the kind of thing that allowed conversation without requiring it. Derek talked about his job, about a promotion he was considering, about the apartment he'd rented on the east side. Small details of a life being rebuilt. He didn't mention divorce, and Elena didn't ask. That was between him and Amber, a resolution they'd have to find or not find on their own terms. Elena's role wasn't to direct that outcome, just to be present for her son while he figured out who he was becoming. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or recognition. The acknowledgement that he'd almost lost something irreplaceable. Jenna stopped by one afternoon with coffee and news. "Amber's moving back to Ohio," she said, settling onto the porch steps where Elena sat with a book. "Saw the U-Haul this morning. One of those long-distance ones." Elena set down her book, processed this information. Ohio was where Amber's family lived, where she'd grown up before moving west with dreams of influence and carefully curated aesthetics. "Derek told you?" Jenna asked. Elena shook her head. Jenna nodded, unsurprised. "Word gets around. My paralegal friend saw the rental agreement. She works at the same company." Elena felt nothing. Not triumph, not relief, not even satisfaction. Just a kind of neutral acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. Amber was leaving, taking her crystals and her vision boards, and her manufactured wellness back to wherever home actually was. The house would stop being a battlefield and return to being just a house, the place Elena lived and practiced and built the life she'd chosen. She sipped her coffee and watched a bird land on the fence Derek had repaired. "Good," she said finally, and meant it. The Arts Council coordinator called with an opportunity Elena hadn't expected. Artist in residence position at the conservatory, teaching, performing, mentoring. A semester commitment with possibility for renewal, stipend plus studio space, chance to work with serious students. "Someone recommended you," Sarah said. "Said you've been inspiring lately, playing with new intensity." Elena suspected Marcus. He had connections at the conservatory, had mentioned her name in context she probably wasn't aware of. She accepted the position before Sarah finished explaining the details. "When do I start?" she asked. "January," Sarah said, "but we'll need you for some planning meetings in December." Elena circled the dates on her calendar, felt anticipation rising in her chest. New students, new space, the formalization of what she'd been doing informally for years. This was what reclamation looked like, not just getting back what had been taken, but moving forward into something larger. She called Marcus to thank him. "I didn't do anything," he insisted, but she could hear the smile in his voice. "You did this yourself. I just made sure the right people were paying attention." November turned to December, days shortening, rehearsals filling with holiday concerts and guest soloists. Elena played the Bach concerto at the December concert, the E major, the one that required absolute precision and gave no room for hiding. She practiced for hours in her music room, the bow finding the strings over and over until the passages became automatic, until she could play with her eyes closed and trust her hands to know the way. The night of the concert, she stood backstage with her violin tuned and ready, and felt something she hadn't felt in months, pure anticipation without anxiety, the clean nervousness of someone about to do what they were meant to do. The performance went well. Better than well. She felt every note, lived inside the music in a way that made the audience disappear. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained, and she stood on stage with her bow at her side and let herself receive it. Thomas hugged her in the wings. "That's what I'm talking about," he said. "That presence." Anna squeezed her hand. Marcus grinned and said nothing, just nodded like she'd confirmed something he already knew. Derek came to the concert, slipped into the back row during the first movement. Elena saw him afterward, waiting by the stage door, hands in his pockets. "That was beautiful," he said, and his voice carried something she hadn't heard in months, pride, uncomplicated by guilt or obligation. They walked to the parking lot together, talking about the performance, about the Brahms the orchestra had played in the second half, about his work week. Normal conversation between a mother and son, the kind of exchange that used to feel effortless before everything got complicated. Before he left, Derek said, "Amber's gone. Back to Ohio, in case you were wondering." Elena nodded. "Jenna mentioned it." Derek looked at his keys, at the pavement, anywhere but at her face. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. For not protecting you. For choosing wrong." Elena touched his arm, brief and gentle. "You're choosing better now," she said. "That's what matters." He hugged her, longer than usual, and drove away. Elena stood in the parking lot watching his taillights disappear, feeling the cold air on her face, and realized she meant what she'd said. The apology mattered less than the actions that followed it. Christmas came quiet. Elena declined Derek's invitation to join him at his apartment. Too soon, too much forced cheer. She spent the day with Marcus and Anna, cooking an elaborate meal in Marcus's kitchen, while they argued affectionately about which Beethoven quartet was superior. James stopped by with cookies his daughter had made, stayed for wine and conversation. These were her people, Elena thought, watching them move comfortably through Marcus's space. Not family by blood, but by choice, by the accumulated years of showing up for each other. New Year's Eve found her alone by choice, practicing in her music room as the sun set. She worked through scales, exercises that would bore an audience but satisfied something in her about precision and control. At midnight, fireworks exploded somewhere in the neighborhood, illegal but traditional, the kind of rule-breaking everyone tolerated once a year. Elena set down her bow and went to the window, watched colored light bloom and fade against the dark sky. Her phone buzzed with texts, Marcus, Anna, James, Jenna, even Sarah from the Arts Council. "Happy New Year, thinking of you, see you soon." Derek texted too. Happy New Year, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on me. Elena typed back, never, love you. Simple words that contained multitudes. She put her phone down and returned to her violin, played through the Bach she'd performed in December, this time just for herself. The notes filled her music room, spilled out through the window she'd cracked open despite the cold, floated into the January night. Somewhere, maybe, neighbors heard. Maybe they recognized the melody, maybe they didn't. It didn't matter. She was playing for the act of playing, for the reclamation of this space and this life and this version of herself that had almost been erased. January brought the conservatory position, new students with serious faces and nervous hands. Elena set up her studio space, smaller than her room at home but with better acoustics, a piano in the corner for accompaniment, windows that faced east to catch morning light. Her first student was a college sophomore, technically proficient but afraid to make mistakes, playing everything with careful precision that lacked soul. Elena listened to her run through the Mendelssohn concerto, then stopped her. "Play it wrong," she said. The student looked confused. On purpose? Miss the shifts? Scratch the bow? Play it badly. The student tried, laughing nervously, producing intentionally terrible sounds. "Now play it again," Elena said, "but remember that the worst thing that can happen is what you just did. And it wasn't that bad." The student played again, looser this time, taking risks with dynamics and phrasing. Not perfect, but alive. Elena smiled. That's it. That's the difference. She thought about Amber, about the careful curation that had consumed her, the need to control every detail until nothing felt real. This was the opposite, the willingness to be imperfect, to play through the mistakes and find beauty in the attempt. She taught this to all her students that first month, in different ways. The fear of getting it wrong would ruin you faster than any actual wrong note. She practiced in her studio after teaching hours, working on new pieces for a recital the conservatory was planning. Debussy, which she'd always found slippery, hard to hold on to. The notes wanted to float away, impressionistic and dreamy, and she had to resist her tendency toward precision. She practiced in the near dark sometimes, letting the sound guide her without the visual cue of fingers on strings. It felt vulnerable, necessary. Like relearning how to trust her instincts after months of having them questioned. Derek's visits continued but changed character. He started bringing dinner sometimes, cooking in Elena's kitchen while she practiced, the smells of garlic and onions drifting into the music room. They ate at the table, talked about their weeks, avoided heavy topics. He mentioned, casually over pasta one evening, that divorce papers had been filed. Elena nodded, didn't ask for details. He looked relieved not to have to explain. "I'm seeing a therapist," he said, "trying to figure out how I got so turned around." Elena reached across the table, squeezed his hand. "That's good," she said. "That's really good." February brought the conservatory recital. Elena played the Debussy, the Brahms sonata with Marcus on cello, and the Bach partita that had become a kind of touchstone for her. Standing in the conservatory hall, smaller and more intimate than the orchestra venue, she felt different than she had at the December concert. Not better or worse, different. More herself, maybe. Less performing and more simply being present with the music. The audience was mostly students and faculty, people who understood what they were hearing, who knew the difficulty of what looked easy. After the recital, her new students surrounded her with questions about phrasing and technique and how she'd managed a particular passage. Elena answered patiently, energized rather than exhausted by their enthusiasm. Sarah approached as the crowd thinned, smiling her crinkled eye smile. "The conservatory made the right choice," she said. "The students love you." Elena thanked her, felt the words settle warmly. This was building something, she thought. Not reclaiming what had been taken, but creating something new from what remained. She drove home through late winter darkness, her violin case in the passenger seat like a companion. The house was dark when she arrived, and she stood on the porch for a moment before unlocking the door, stood in the exact spot where she'd stood that night in August when the key wouldn't turn. 7 months ago, though it felt longer. She'd been exhausted then, jet-lagged and betrayed, standing outside looking in at a life someone else was trying to steal. Now she stood outside by choice, with keys that worked and a house that was indisputably hers, and a future that extended forward with possibility instead of dread. Inside, she turned on lights, made tea, and settled into her music room with a new score she'd ordered. Bartók, challenging and strange, the kind of piece that would take months to learn properly. She opened to the first page, studied the notation, started picking out the opening measures slowly. Her fingers stumbled at first, finding the intervals awkward, the rhythm slippery. She played the same 4 bars 10 times, then 20, until they started to feel natural. This was the work, she thought. Not the performance, not the applause, but these hours of repetition and discovery, the slow transformation of marks on paper into sound in air. A text from Anna. Amazing tonight. Coffee tomorrow? Elena replied yes, set her phone aside, kept playing. Marcus called as she was packing up her violin for the night, his voice warm through the speaker. You're playing like someone who remembers why they started, he said. Elena laughed. Is that a compliment? Marcus made a considering sound. It's an observation, but yes, also a compliment. They talked for a few minutes about the recital, about the Bartok she was starting to learn, about his upcoming solo performance. Easy conversation between colleagues who'd become friends, who'd become something like family. Before hanging up, Marcus said, You know what's different about you now? Elena waited. You're not apologizing anymore. For taking up space, for having a career, for existing loudly. Elena sat with this, recognized the truth in it. I didn't realize I was doing that, she said. Marcus's voice gentled. Most people don't. But you stopped, and it suits you. Spring semester deepened, days lengthening, conservatory students preparing for juries and recitals. Elena pushed them, insisted on musicality over technique, on emotional truth over perfect execution. Some struggled with this. They'd been trained to prioritize accuracy, to fear mistakes above all else. She told them about the night she'd stood locked out of her house, about how fear of confrontation had nearly cost her everything. Not the details, just the shape of the lesson. Playing it safe doesn't keep you safe, she said. It just makes you small. She watched understanding dawn on their faces, watched them start taking risks in their playing, and felt something like purpose settling over her teaching. March brought Derek's divorce finalization. He mentioned it briefly, no drama, just a legal proceeding that had concluded. Elena asked if he was okay. He shrugged, stirred sugar into coffee they were drinking at her kitchen table. Yeah, I think so. It's weird, but mostly I feel relieved. He looked at her directly, something he'd been able to do more easily lately. I'm sorry it took losing you to figure out I was losing myself. Elena nodded, didn't say the easy thing about how it was okay. It hadn't been okay. But they were finding their way back to something that worked, and that mattered more than pretending the damage hadn't happened. They started hiking together on weekends, driving to trails outside the city and walking for hours without talking much. Derek seemed to need the physical exertion, the movement that allowed thought without requiring conversation. Elena found she enjoyed it too. The mindfulness of feet finding purchase on uneven ground, the way her breath synchronized with her steps. They were rebuilding through proximity, she thought. Not forcing reconciliation, but allowing it to happen naturally, like muscles healing after injury. April brought the conservatory's end-of-year showcase, her students performing for faculty and visiting professionals. Elena sat in the audience watching her sophomore student play the Mendelssohn, with confidence that hadn't been there in January, taking risks with dynamics, missing a shift in the third movement but recovering smoothly. Perfect would have been boring. This was alive. The student finished, flushed and grinning, and Elena stood to applaud with everyone else. Afterward, the student found her backstage. Thank you, she said, for teaching me it's okay to be human. Elena hugged her, brief and tight. You taught yourself. I just got out of your way. May brought Elena's birthday, 57, a number that felt arbitrary but significant somehow. Derek took her to dinner at the Italian place on Morrison Street, the one with the good wine list and homemade pasta. They ordered too much food, drank wine that made them both sleepy and nostalgic. Derek gave her a gift wrapped in careful folds, inside, a photograph she'd forgotten existed. Her and Derek, years ago, him maybe 7 or 8, standing together after one of her concerts. She was still in her black dress, violin case at her feet, and he was grinning up at her with gap-toothed pride. Found it in some old boxes, Derek said. Thought you might want it. Elena traced the image with one finger, felt tears forming. Thank you, she said. This is perfect. They drove home separately, Derek to his apartment, Elena to her house, and she carried the photograph inside, found a frame in the hall closet, and put it on the mantel in the living room. Her past and present existing together, proof that love survived complication, that people could fail each other and still find their way back. She made tea and sat in her music room, not playing, just sitting with the quiet. The house felt exactly right. Lived in, hers, filled with evidence of the life she'd chosen. June brought the end of her first semester at the conservatory, faculty meetings about fall curriculum, promises to keep in touch with students who were graduating. Sarah offered her a contract for the full academic year, increased salary, possibility of heading the strings program in a few years if she wanted it. Elena accepted without hesitation. This was her life now, teaching and performing, building connections, showing up fully. Not the life Amber had tried to erase, but the life Elena had insisted on keeping, had fought to reclaim not through legal battles but through simple, stubborn presence. She hosted an end-of-year gathering at her house, students, faculty, orchestra friends, neighbors, including Margaret, who'd become a genuine friend over the past months. They spilled out into the backyard where Elena had set up lights and speakers, where someone's iPhone played jazz and people danced badly and ate too much. Derek came with a date, a woman from his therapy group he mentioned casually, and Elena watched them together, tentative but genuine, Derek laughing at something she said. He caught Elena's eye across the yard and she smiled back. Late evening, most guests gone, Marcus and Anna helping clean up. They moved through Elena's house with familiar efficiency, knew where the trash bags lived and how she liked her kitchen organized. Family, Elena thought again. Not the family she'd been born into, or the family that had almost destroyed itself through betrayal and cowardice, but the family she'd chosen and been chosen by. Marcus loaded the dishwasher. Anna swept the floor. Elena wiped down counters and felt grateful in a way that was almost overwhelming. After they left, she took her coffee to the front porch. Summer evening, air still warm, the neighbor kid practicing violin across the street. One of her students now, a high schooler with more enthusiasm than discipline, but genuine love for the instrument. The sound drifted over, tentative scales that became a recognizable melody. Vivaldi, probably, or maybe Bach. The student stumbled, started over, found the thread again. Elena smiled, listened, let the music wash over her. She stood on her porch at twilight, coffee cooling in her hand. Same porch where she'd stood 7 months ago at 2 a.m, key refusing to turn, daughter-in-law's face appearing in the window with that devastating mouthed command, "Go away." Same physical location, but everything transformed. Then she'd been locked out, looking in at a life being stolen. Now she stood with the door open behind her, her house audibly alive with the evening's lingering energy, music from across the street floating into the space she'd reclaimed. The student hit a rough passage, repeated it, found the rhythm. Elena didn't turn around to look inside, didn't need to verify her certificates still hung on the walls, her music still filled the stands, her life still occupied the rooms as it should. She knew it was there, she knew she was here. The key in her pocket was the right key, the lock was her lock, and the house breathing quietly behind her was exactly what it had always been. Hers. Not because she'd won some legal battle or exposed some fraud or received some external vindication, but because she simply refused to disappear. She'd stood on sidewalks and in rehearsal halls and in her own music room and insisted on existing, loudly, fully, without apology. The coffee was cold now, but she sipped it anyway, watched the evening deepen, listened to her student practice across the street. This was the resolution. Not triumph, not revenge, just this. Standing on her own porch, door open, music floating out into the world she'd never actually left. She'd been here all along. She just needed to remember.